Somewhere beneath the place where you are lying right now, the ground is not as solid as you believe it to be. Maybe not directly under you, maybe a mile away or 10, but somewhere close under a quiet field or a supermarket car park or the cold stone floor of a church, there is a space that ought to be filled and is not. A room with no door that anyone living has opened. A passage that runs on into the dark for a while and then simply stops, sealed off with stone that someone cut by hand a very long time ago for a reason that no one alive can tell you. You have walked over places like this. Everyone has. Across this small island, under the towns and the meadows and the motorways, there are thousands of hollow places, and a surprising number of them cannot be explained. Not by historians, not by archaeologists, not by the people who have spent their whole careers crawling into them with torches and tape measures and a stubborn refusal to give up. We think of Britain as a country that has been mapped to the very last hedge, surveyed, photographed, catalogued, argued over, picked clean by generations of careful people who love nothing more than a footnote. And on the surface, that is almost true. But the surface is only the lid. Underneath it lies another country entirely, and that country keeps its secrets very well. Tonight, slowly and gently, with nowhere we need to be and nothing we need to rush toward, we are going to go down into it. And before we descend, there is one place I want you to hold in the back of your mind. A place beneath a seaside town in the south of England that is, by a wide margin, the strangest thing we will meet all night. Hundreds of thousands of people have stood inside it. No one knows who made it. No one knows when. No one even knows whether it is 200 years old or 2,000. We will get there, I promise you, but not yet. Some doors are better opened slowly. So settle in, let your shoulders drop. If your eyes want to close before we reach the end, that is allowed, that is welcome, that is rather the point. And while we are here, in the dark, together, I would love to know where in the world you are. Not just the country, but the hour. Whatever the time is where you are lying right now, late evening, the dead middle of the night, that strange, grey hour just before the birds start. Leave it in a comment if you feel like it. There is something quietly lovely about the thought of all of us scattered across the planet, in different time zones and different beds, awake or drifting off together while one calm voice talks about the dark under England. A cottage in the rain, a flat above a busy street, a house at the edge of a desert on the other side of the world. Tell me where you are. I read them, and I like knowing. And if you are new here, and you think you might like more nights like this one, then stay a while. Follow along. There are many more of these slow journeys waiting whenever you need them. Now, let us go down. To understand how strange the underground of Britain really is, you first have to understand how much of it there is. And this is the part that tends to surprise people who have never looked. Britain is a small place. You could drive from the south coast of England to the top of Scotland in a single long day, if the roads were kind to you. The whole island would fit comfortably inside a single one of the larger American states, with room to spare. It is a modest patch of land, green and crowded and ancient, sitting in a cold grey sea. And yet underneath that modest patch of land lies one of the most tangled, layered, complicated underworlds anywhere on earth. Consider this, under the single city of Nottingham, not the county, just the city, there are more than 900 recorded caves and chambers cut by hand into the soft red rock. 900, and that figure is not the final count. It is simply where the counting has reached so far, because every few years a builder somewhere puts a spade through a cellar floor and finds another one nobody knew about. Under the old heart of Edinburgh there are sealed streets, not passages, not cellars, whole streets with the fronts of houses still standing along them, buried and built over and forgotten, and then stumbled upon again much later by people who had no idea they were there. The soft chalk hills of southern England are threaded through with passages so old that even the people of the Middle Ages looking at them decided they must be ancient. The coast of Cornwall hides sea caves that smugglers used with great enthusiasm in the 1700s, and which were already old and worn and mysterious by the time the smugglers ever found them. Beneath parts of London, there are tunnels on no map leading to no known place, recorded in no document anyone has ever located. The reason for all of this comes down to a single, simple fact. People have been living on this island continuously for a very long time. 12,000 years, give or take. And for almost all of that time, in every era, for dozens of different reasons, human beings have been digging down. But here is the thing that makes it so hard to untangle. They did not dig according to any plan. One people would cut into the earth and live their lives and vanish. Centuries later, another people would cut into the very same earth, often without the faintest idea that the first ones had ever been there. And then a third would come, and a fourth, each leaving their marks layered over the marks before, like writing scratched onto a slate that was never quite wiped clean. So you can find, today, a single passage that begins in one style, belonging to one age and then changes halfway along into something that looks completely different, and ends in a chamber that belongs to a third time entirely. And the question of how those three pieces fit together, whether they were made in the same year or 1,000 years apart, can take a lifetime of patient work to even begin to answer. That is the puzzle we are going to walk through tonight. Not the underground that is well understood, not the Victorian sewers and the wartime shelters that have neat little plaques on them. We are going into the other kind, the spaces that remain genuinely, stubbornly mysterious, even to the people who know them best. We are going to be honest about what we know, and just as honest about what we do not. And we are going to spend most of our time in that uncomfortable middle ground where the evidence points in three directions at once, and nobody is brave enough to claim more certainty than the facts allow. And we begin the way the whole story begins in the deep past, with a question so simple that it sounds almost foolish until you sit with it for a moment. Why does a person dig? Think about what it actually takes. To go down into the earth is to fight the earth. It is cold and it is dark, and the air is thin and still, and the weight of everything above you presses down, and the ground does not want a hole in it and will try, slowly and patiently, to close any hole you make. To dig is to commit your body and your time and quite possibly your life to making a space where the world insists there should be none. People did this. Again and again, in every age, our ancestors chose to do this. And the first great reason, the oldest reason we can still trace in the rock, was hunger for a particular kind of stone. Picture the south of England, far out in the rolling chalk country, 4,500 years ago. The land is not the open patchwork of fields you know now. It is wilder, wetter, greener in a darker way, thick with woodland in the low places and open only on the high chalk ridges where the early farmers liked to settle. The whole island holds, at most, a couple of 100,000 people. You could walk for days and meet almost no one, and on one of those high chalk hills, a small group of people are doing something extraordinary. They are sinking shafts into the ground. There are several places where they did this, scattered across the chalk. One of the most haunting sights on a quiet hilltop in Sussex, a place that today is just grass and sky, and the wind moving through it, with a few faint dimples in the turf if you know how to look. Underneath that turf, the hill is hollow. The early people drove shafts straight down through the white chalk, some of them far deeper than a house is tall, and at the bottom, where the shaft met the seam they were hunting, they turned and dug sideways, following the seam outward in every direction, like the roots of a tree spreading from a single trunk. And what were they hunting? All the way down there in the dark by the light of a small flame. With the chalk pressing in on every side. Flint, it sounds almost too plain. But flint to these people was everything. Flint is what you make tools from. Knives, scrapers, the sharp tips of arrows, the edges that let you work wood and hide and bone, the whole technology on which a life depended, and the flint that lies near the surface, exposed for ages to frost and rain, is cracked and tired and unreliable. It shatters wrong. It lets you down. But the flint deep in the chalk, the flint that has lain sealed and protected far below, is different. It is dark and smooth and almost glassy, and when a skilled hand strikes it just so, it breaks along clean and predictable lines, exactly where you want it to. To the people who knew how to work it, that deep flint was worth almost any effort, and the effort was enormous. They had no metal, none at all. They dug these shafts, some of them sinking many meters through solid chalk, using picks made from the antlers of red deer. Just antler, and stone and muscle and patience, and an understanding of the rock so deep that they could follow a single good seam sideways through the dark for a long way without bringing the ceiling down on their own heads. They did this not once in a burst, but over and over, for generations. One shaft would be worked out, and they would begin to fill it with the spoil from the next, and start again and again, and the hilltop slowly became a honeycomb. This was not random scratching at the dirt. This was an organized industry passed down from parent to child across hundreds of years. Someone had to teach the next person how to find the good seam, how to read the chalk, how to follow it safely, how to nap the stone once it reached the daylight. Knowledge like that is hard-won and easily lost, and these people kept it alive across so many lifetimes that we cannot count them all. We do not have their names. We do not have their language. We have almost nothing of them at all except the holes they left, and the marks of those antler picks still scratched into the white walls, exactly where their hands left them, 4,500 years ago. But here is where the simple story of practical people doing practical work begins to bend. Because down at the bottom of some of these shafts in the deepest galleries, archaeologists have found things that do not fit the picture of plain economic labor. In more than one of these ancient mines, in a quiet niche carved into the chalk, someone left an offering, a small figure shaped from chalk. A little lamp? A careful arrangement of the very flint they had come down to gather, placed not as if dropped, but as if presented, set down on purpose, with intention, in the dark, and then left there. When the mine was finished and closed, these things were not taken back up into the light. They were allowed to remain, as though it would have been wrong to remove them. What does that mean? We genuinely do not know. Was it a prayer before opening a new gallery, a small bargain struck with whatever power these people believed lived in the earth? Was it thanks or fear or devotion to a god of the deep ground? Was it something we have no word for at all? Nobody can tell you. But it was deliberate. Someone, by the light of a tiny flame, with the weight of the whole hill above them, chose to do this. And this is the first time tonight we will meet something that is going to follow us all the way down into every layer and every age. The practical and the sacred tangled together in the same dark room. People went underground for the most sensible reasons in the world, to find stone, to store food, to stay safe. And then having gone down, they seem to have felt something there. Some sense that below the surface the ordinary rules grew thin, that the boundary between the everyday world and whatever lies beyond it was, in these places, not quite as firm as it was up in the sunlight. Keep that feeling close. We are going to need it again and again. Because if reaching for stone is the oldest reason we went into the dark, it is not the strangest thing we left down there. Long before the flint miners, far older than their deepest shaft, our ancestors went underground for a reason that has nothing to do with tools or trade or storage at all. And what they did down there, in the total blackness, is one of the most moving things human beings have ever done. To find it, we have to go further back than 4,500 years. We have to go back to the ice, There is a limestone gorge on the border between two English counties, a narrow, steep little valley with a stream at the bottom and crags rising on either side, pocked with the mouths of caves. By day it is a pretty ordinary place.
People walk their dogs there.
But these caves hold something that exists nowhere else in Britain, and for a very long time nobody realized it was there. On the walls of these caves, faint and weathered and easy to miss, there are pictures that were cut and scratched into the rock by people who lived here at the very end of the last ice age, when this valley was a frozen place at the edge of a glacial world, and the animals moving through it were the great beasts of that vanished cold. There are deer.
There is what seems to be a bird.
There are shapes that may be a bison or a horse or something we no longer have a name for. They are the only confirmed Ice Age cave art in the whole of Britain, and they were made something like 13,000 years ago, or even a little more. Sit with that number for a moment. 13,000 years. Before farming, before the wheel, before writing, before the first city anywhere on Earth, before almost everything we think of as history, a small band of people, dressed in fur against a cold we can barely imagine, came into the dark of these caves, and by the light of a flame they made marks on the wall. Not for storage.
Not for shelter.
Not because they needed to. Because something in them needed to, and the most extraordinary thing about these pictures is that nobody noticed them until our own century. For decades, for generations, people came and went through these caves and walked straight past the oldest art in the country, because the marks are so faint and the human eye is so quick to dismiss what it does not expect. It took fresh eyes and good light and someone willing to look slowly to finally see what had been waiting on the wall for 13,000 years. You would think that would be the whole story of that gorge. It is not. Because more recently, much more recently, people looking even more carefully at the walls of these same caves found something else. Something far younger, but in its own way just as strange. Carved into the rock, in great numbers, far more than anywhere else yet found in Britain, were marks of a completely different kind. Letters tangled together, loops and crosses, patterns scratched deliberately into the stone near the cave mouths and the dark openings. These are not Ice Age. These are from the troubled centuries of more recent history, perhaps 400 or 500 years ago, and they are what are sometimes called protective marks. Marks made by ordinary people, frightened people, to ward off evil, to stop something from coming out of the dark or to stop something from getting in. People in those centuries believed with real conviction that bad things lived in the earth, that misfortune and witchcraft could seep up out of holes in the ground, and that the right symbol, carved in the right place, could hold it back. So in this one narrow valley, on the same cold walls, two kinds of people separated by more than 10,000 years did the very same thing. They went to the edge of the dark, and they made marks. One group reaching toward whatever was down there, the other group trying to keep it at bay. And we, looking at both, can read neither with any certainty. We can only stand in the gorge with the stream running over the stones the way it has for all those thousands of years, and feel the enormous reach of human time pressing in from both directions at once. Why do we go to the dark and leave marks on the wall? Whatever the answer is, it is very, very old.
And it is still not finished. Let us climb back toward the surface for a moment.
And move forward in time and travel to the far southwest of the island, to the very tip of Cornwall where the land runs out into the Atlantic in a long granite finger battered by the sea. The people who lived here in the Iron Age, more than 2,000 years ago, built something that the people of this region have a special word for.
They called these things fogus.
The word comes from the old Cornish word for a cave, and that is more or less what they look like. A fogo is an underground passage, lined and roofed with great slabs of stone built into the ground beside an ancient settlement. You go in through a low opening, so low that you often have to bend or crawl, and you find yourself in a curving stone corridor, cool and dark and silent, running on for some distance beneath the earth before it ends. There are several of these in Cornwall, and they belong to a wider family of underground chambers found across the Iron Age world of the far north and west, in Scotland, in Ireland, across the sea, in Brittany. They share enough in common that they must belong to a single tradition, even though no two are quite alike. And the great question about all of them, argued over for as long as anyone has studied them, is the simplest question of all. What were they for? The sensible answer, and it is a perfectly good one, is storage. An underground stone chamber stays cool and steady all year round. In an age long before any way of keeping things cold, a fogu would have been one of the best places in the world to store food. Milk and butter, grain, salted meat, root vegetables. All of it would last longer down in that constant chill than anywhere up above. And these chambers sit right beside farming settlements that kept animals and grew crops. So the storage idea fits the evidence nicely. But the moment you actually go inside one, the simple storage explanation starts to feel thin, because some of these chambers are much grander than any farm could possibly need. Some of them have side passages so narrow that a person has to turn sideways and squeeze through, which would make hauling sacks of grain in and out almost impossible. Some have strange little features, niches and creeps and low crawling tunnels branching off the main corridor that have nothing to do with stacking provisions and everything to do with, well, nobody's quite sure what, and there is the way they feel. There is a deliberateness to the building of them, a care in how the great stones were chosen and fitted that goes beyond what a cold cupboard would ever require. People put serious skill and serious labour into these spaces, far more than mere storage would justify, which has left many who study them unwilling to write the fogus off as simple larders and reaching instead for other ideas. Were they places of refuge, a hidden chamber to slip into when danger came over the hill? Perhaps, although the narrow entrances would make a poor escape route and a single guarded doorway makes a poor hiding place.
Were they sacred?
Were they where the community went down into the earth to meet whatever they believed lived there? The same impulse that put the little chalk figure in the flint mine, carried forward across thousands of years and hundreds of miles. Some who have spent time in the fogus, in the deep stone quiet of them, find that idea hard to shake. There are even those who have noticed that certain fogus seem to align in the placing of their openings with the rising or setting of the sun at particular turns of the year, as though the dark of the passage was built to catch a single shaft of light on a single morning. Whether that is real, or whether it is the human eye finding patterns it wants to find, is exactly the kind of question that has no settled answer. And so the fogus join the flint mines and the painted caves in that long, honest list of things we can describe perfectly and explain not at all. We know where they are. We know roughly when they were made. We know they were built with great care by people who clearly needed them badly. But the why, the meaning of them, the thing that was actually in the minds of the people who crawled down into that cold, stone dark, stays just out of reach, just below the threshold of what the evidence will tell us. Are you noticing the pattern yet? Because it is going to repeat all night, and it is the real engine of this whole strange story. Over and over we will find spaces that are completely real, and completely deliberate, and completely unexplained. The not knowing is not a gap waiting to be filled in by the next clever person. With these places, the not knowing seems to be permanent, built in, part of what they are. And nowhere is that truer than with the next kind of underground space we are going to meet. Because now we move from chambers whose builders left no words to a chamber whose walls are absolutely covered in pictures, in figures, in symbols, in what looks for all the world like a message. A chamber that should be the easiest of all to read, and it cannot be read at all. In a small market town in the gentle countryside north of London, life goes on above the ground much as it does in any English town. There are shops and a high street and people going about their day, with no particular thought for what lies beneath their feet. But under that ordinary town, cut down into the soft white chalk, there is a single round chamber that has baffled everyone who has ever seriously studied it for well over a century and a half. It was found by accident, as the way so many of these places are found. Long ago, workmen were digging in the marketplace and their tools suddenly broke through into emptiness, a void. They lowered someone down into the hole on a rope to see what was there, and the report that came back up was strange. Below the marketplace, below the feet of everyone who had ever walked across it, there was a room. When they cleared it out, here is what they found. A narrow shaft, barely wide enough for a grown person to climb down, opening at the bottom into a tall, circular chamber shaped like a great bell, cut cleanly into the chalk, with a domed roof high overhead, and every surface of its curved walls from about waist height all the way up was carved. The carvings are not random. That much is obvious to anyone who sees them. They are an elaborate, crowded, deliberate scheme of images. There are crosses, many of them of several different kinds. There are figures that look like saints and holy people, some of them recognizable by the things they carry. There are hearts and hands and what may be a scene of the crucifixion. There are shapes that seem to be shields bearing symbols. There is a sense, standing inside it, of a whole world of meaning pressed into the chalk by someone who cared about it enormously, and nobody can tell you who, or when, or why. The most famous idea, the one that has captured the most imaginations, is that this chamber was made by a secret and powerful order of warrior monks, an order founded long ago to protect travelers on the dangerous roads to the Holy Land, an order that grew over 2 centuries into one of the richest and most feared institutions in all of Europe, and which was then suddenly and brutally destroyed, its members arrested, its leaders accused of dark and secret crimes that most modern historians believe were largely invented for reasons that had far more to do with money and politics than with any real wickedness. An order whose very name has been soaked in mystery and conspiracy ever since, and there was, in fact, a house belonging to that order not very far from this town. The town itself sits at the crossing of 2 ancient roads, one of them older than the Romans, a natural place for travelers to pause. The idea that members of this secret order cut and carved this hidden chamber as a private chapel, a place of devotion on their journeys between their houses, is undeniably seductive. Some of the symbols on the walls do echo the kinds of crosses linked to such orders. The whole feel of the place, small and enclosed and clearly made for some quiet, sacred purpose, fits the idea of a private oratory rather well. But when the people who actually study such things examine the carvings closely, the neat theory starts to come apart in their hands. The style of the carving is not all of one piece. Some figures look as though they were made at different times than others. Some are far more skilled, some far cruder, in a way that suggests not a single artist working to a single plan, but many different hands across many different years. Some of the symbols are not especially secret or special at all, but the ordinary furniture of everyday faith in those centuries, the kind of thing any devout person of the age might have carved. And then there is the silence, the complete and total silence of the written record. In all the surviving documents of that age, the charters and inventories and accounts and letters, there is not one single mention of this chamber.
Not a word. No one wrote down that it existed or who made it or what it was for.
For a space so elaborate, so clearly important to someone, that silence is deafening. Now the absence of any record does not prove the secret order was not involved. You can even turn it around. If this truly was a hidden and forbidden place, then after the order was destroyed, the people who knew of it would have had every reason in the world to make sure no record of it ever survived. Silence can be a clue, but silence can never be proof. And a theory that leans entirely on the fact that there is no evidence is a theory standing on very thin ground. So others have offered gentler ideas. Perhaps it was a hermitage, a place where a single holy recluse shut themselves away from the world and spent year upon year carving these images into the chalk as a form of prayer. A long, slow devotion measured out one chisel stroke at a time. Hermits were a real and accepted part of life in those centuries, and some did choose strange and lonely and underground places to do their praying in. Perhaps it belonged to a local religious guild. Perhaps it was a place of pilgrimage tied to some local holy story, now entirely lost. Perhaps it was simply a space that many different people added to over a very long time, each one carving a little more into the walls left by those before. None of these ideas has ever gathered enough evidence to win. The chamber remains, in the careful and frustrated language of the experts, a site of unknown origin and unknown purpose.
And you can go and stand in it, even now.
You climb down the narrow shaft, and the round chalk walls close around you, and the carved figures press in from every side in the low light. And the silence down there is something you can almost feel on your skin. And you understand, immediately and completely, why no one has ever been able to let this place go.
Something happened here.
Someone cared enough about this small, dark room to spend an immense portion of their one life inside it, alone, cutting pictures into the chalk by lamplight. Who they were and what they believed and why they chose this exact spot beneath the crossing of two old roads, no one can tell you. And that determined refusal to be known is something this chamber shares with so much of the British underground. It is worth pausing here, before we go deeper, to sit with that feeling for a moment, the feeling of not knowing, because it is easy, when you go looking for mysteries, to expect them to feel dramatic, to expect a thrill, a chill, a sense of something supernatural. And that is not in truth what these places feel like at all. They feel ordinary in their bones. The chalk is only chalk. The stone is only stone. There is no glow, no menace, nothing that would strike you as otherworldly if you came upon it without knowing the story. And yet they carry a weight that is far larger than their size. A small round room cut into the chalk, covered in carvings no one can explain, is not grand. By any plain measure it is a modest thing. But to stand inside it is to feel the weight of every explanation that has ever been offered for it, and found wanting. Every clever theory that arrived full of confidence and quietly left again. Every generation of people who climbed down that shaft and stood exactly where you are standing and understood that something real had happened here without ever being able to say what. That is not magic. It is something simpler and stranger than magic. It is the precise sensation of standing in front of evidence you cannot fully read. It is what you feel when you hold a letter written in a language you only half understand. You can catch the shape of it. You can make out many of the words, but the heart of the meaning keeps slipping away just out of reach. And the parts you cannot grasp are exactly the parts that would tell you what it all means. The mysterious tunnels of Britain are letters like that, written in a language we can only half read, and the words we cannot make out are never the trivial ones. They are always the most important words of all.
Why here? Why this deep?
Why this shape, this direction, these carvings and not others? And why, oh why, did no one ever write it down?
Hold on to that.
We are about to descend into a part of the island where even that half a language runs out. Not far from where the green hills roll down toward the river in the middle of England, there is a place where the soft red rock has been carved into a row of caves above the water. For a very long time, everyone agreed on what these caves were. A folly, people said. A romantic ornament, dug out a few hundred years ago by some wealthy landowner who wanted a picturesque grotto on his estate, a fashionable little ruin to impress his guests. A pleasant story and a tidy one, and for generations nobody questioned it. And then, not long ago, people who look very closely at old stone took a proper look at these caves, and they began to wonder whether the tidy story was wrong by more than 1,000 years. Because the more carefully they examined the way the rock had been cut, the doorways, the windows, the proportions of the rooms, the more it began to look not like the plaything of a wealthy gentleman, but like something far, far older. Something that may go back well over 1,000 years, to the troubled, half-lit centuries after the Romans left, and before England as we know it had taken shape. There is even a local thread of old story that ties these caves to a particular figure of that distant age. A man who, the tales say, gave up a throne and went to live as a hermit, in poverty and prayer, in a cave by the river, if that is true, and it is a careful and serious suggestion rather than a wild one. Then for centuries, people stood in front of one of the oldest surviving carved dwellings in the country and saw only a garden ornament. They looked straight at something ancient and called it modern because the modern story was the one they had been handed and nobody had thought to question it. And that should make us pause, because if a place that obvious could hide its real age in plain sight for so long, what does that say about all the other underground spaces, the ones nobody has yet looked at with fresh and careful eyes? How many garden follies are secretly ancient? How many things we are sure we understand are simply waiting for someone to notice that the story we have been telling is the wrong one? This is one of the deep difficulties of the whole subject. A space made by one group of people in one age does not stay frozen. It gets used again. Reopened, enlarged, sealed, forgotten, rediscovered, repurposed, given a new story, then forgotten again. Each use leaves a faint trace, and the traces lie on top of one another until the whole sequence is almost impossible to pull apart. When you ask of one of these places who made this, the honest answer is sometimes that it was made by several different peoples across several different centuries, and that nobody has yet done the patient physical work needed to tell them apart. Which brings us to the people who came to this island and were not intimidated by the underground at all, who looked at the earth not with awe, but with the cool, confident eye of engineers, the Romans. When the Romans came to Britain, they brought with them a relationship with the underground that was almost breathtaking in its boldness. This was a people who built aqueducts that strode across whole valleys, who heated their floors and their baths, who threaded great cities with sewers, who tunneled and channeled and drained across an empire that stretched from the cold edge of Scotland down to the deserts of the east. The earth held no fear for them. It was simply a material to be shaped. They held this island for the better part of 4 centuries, and the marks they left beneath it are still being found today. The most familiar of these is the heating system they built under the floors of any building that mattered. The principle is beautifully simple. You raise the floor of a room up on little pillars of brick, leaving a hollow space underneath. Then you light a furnace at one side and keep it burning, and the hot air flows through that hidden space beneath the floor and up through channels built into the walls, warming the whole room from below and from the sides at once. It is an elegant answer to the problem of staying warm in a cold northern winter, and the Romans built it wherever they built to last. And the remarkable thing is how often those hollow spaces survive. Across England, beneath the modern city centres, when builders dig down for the foundations of some new tower, they break through into the Roman levels, and there, in the cool dark, the little brick pillars are still standing in their neat rows, holding up a floor that vanished long ago, as though the whole system is simply waiting with infinite patience for someone to come back and light the furnace one more time. But the Romans also went underground for harder, hungrier reasons. They came to this island in no small part for what was buried in it. Lead and iron, copper, even gold. And metal means mines, and mines mean going down. They drove underground galleries into the hills, following the veins of ore deep into the rock. In the far west, in the green hills of Wales, there was a Roman gold operation on a scale that still astonishes, with great workings cut into the hillside and a clever system of channels and aqueducts to bring water crashing down across the rock to expose the precious veins. This was not some small local affair. This was the organized industry of an empire. planned and funded and driven on a scale that no village could ever have managed. And yet,
Even with the Romans, even with all their love of writing things down,
the underground keeps its secrets. There are old traditions in the cities they founded of tunnels and passages that match no known Roman waterworks that lead nowhere on any Roman plan. Some of these, when investigated, turn out to be much later. Some remain entirely unexplained. And the reason they are so hard to pin down is the same reason that haunts this whole subject. Cities reuse what they find. A Roman drain becomes the base of a later building. A later cellar gets deepened by the people who come after. A passage gets extended, then collapses, then is forgotten. And the neat layers that an archaeologist relies on to read the past get scrambled and crushed together until untangling them would take years of work. That, in most cases, simply never happens, because the diggers are in a hurry and the past gets sealed away again under fresh concrete before anyone can read it properly. But to feel the strangest and oldest of the metal workings, we have to leave the Romans behind and go to a particular forest in the west of England, on the edge of Wales, where the trees grow over a landscape that looks like nowhere else on the island. The people of this forest have an old word for the workings their ancestors left in the ground. They call them scowls, and to walk among the scowls is a genuinely uncanny experience. The ground heaves and folds into deep, mossy hollows and weird ridges, great pits and crevices and overhangs all furred over with green, as though some enormous creature had clawed at the earth long ago, and the forest had grown back over the wounds. It looks less like a mine than like a ruin from a story, the kind of half-natural, half-made place where you would expect to meet something out of an old tale. People have filmed fantasy worlds here, and you can see why. And the question of how old the scowls really are is genuinely open. People have been digging iron out of this forest for an extraordinarily long time, certainly back to the days of the Romans, who worked it hard, and very probably long before that, deep into the Iron Age and perhaps earlier still. The trouble is that iron was worked here so continuously by so many generations right up into modern times that the earliest workings have been dug through and dug over and reshaped so many times that pulling the original from the later is fearfully hard. When you stand in a scowl and run your hand over the green stone, you are touching something that human hands have been shaping for thousands of years, and you cannot say with any confidence when it began. The people of this forest carried that deep history forward in a way found almost nowhere else. For centuries, they held a special ancient rite, passed down and fiercely guarded, that allowed those born within the forest who had worked underground to dig their own small mines, free of the usual rules that bound everyone else. A rite rooted so far back in time that its true origins fade into legend, a living thread running unbroken from the deep past into living memory, connecting the people walking the forest today to the very first souls who ever broke its ground in search of iron. And here, again, the practical and the strange refuse to come apart. These are working mines dug for the hardest of economic reasons, to wrest metal from rock. And yet the scowls feel sacred or haunted, or at the very least charged with something, in a way that no ledger of iron production could ever explain. Generation upon generation went down into this ground. The ground remembers them in its shape, but what it was actually like to be them, what they thought as they went down, what the dark meant to them, stays locked in the green stone, silent. Let us come back up to the surface now, and forward in time into the busy centuries of the Middle Ages, when the island had filled with market towns and monasteries, and the whole elaborate order of medieval life. By now, the underground was already an ancient and layered thing. Whatever the Romans had left, whatever the people before them had cut, was simply part of the ground now, encountered now and then when someone dug a well or laid a foundation, and explained, when it was explained at all, as the work of Romans or giants or the devil, or the fairy folk whose name it was wiser not to say aloud. The people of the Middle Ages did plenty of digging of their own, and much of it we understand perfectly well. Beneath the market squares of old English towns, in remarkable numbers, there survived the vaulted stone storerooms that merchants built under their houses and shops. Cool, secure, fireproof in towns built mostly of timber, where fire was a constant terror. Wine and wool and spices and grain kept better down there than anywhere above. Many of these beautiful stone cellars are still in use today, beneath the restaurants and bars of historic city centres, as snug and dry as the day they were built. There is no mystery in them. They are exactly what they appear to be, but the moment you move from the cellar to the tunnel, you step into a fog of story so thick that it becomes very hard to tell what is real. There is a particular legend that you will hear, in some version in almost every old town in the country. It goes like this: a church or an abbey or a castle is secretly connected by an underground passage to some other building far away. The tunnel was used by monks, or for smuggling, or for escape, or for secret meetings between people who could not be seen together. It is blocked now, or flooded, or too dangerous to enter, but it certainly exists. Old so-and-so went down it as a child. Everyone knows about it. And the passage is said to run for a mile.
Or 2 miles, or even 5. And here, almost every single time,
the evidence simply evaporates. When historians and archaeologists actually go looking for these tunnels, they keep reaching the same gentle, slightly weary conclusion. The human love of a secret passage is enormously, wildly stronger than the actual evidence that most of them ever existed. The story is so satisfying, the image of a hidden tunnel beneath the old church so irresistible, that people have attached it to nearly every blocked archway, every collapsed cellar, every old drain and forgotten void in the country. The map of supposed medieval tunnels is, for the most part, a map not of holes in the ground, but of holes in the imagination. And yet, and this is the genuinely tricky part,
not all of them are false.
Some of those passages are real. Monasteries genuinely did have underground channels, often built to carry water in and waste away. And the medieval builders made these with such skill that some are large enough to walk through and connect building to building in ways that look, if you meet them without knowing, exactly like a deliberate secret passage. Some castles genuinely did have a short hidden way out through the walls for defenders to slip into the countryside if the worst happened. The real and the imagined are tangled together so tightly that the whole challenge becomes telling which is which. The legends are mostly false, but not entirely, and the few that are true are buried inside a vast drift of ones that are not. Now, some of the people who used the underground in those later centuries had a powerful reason to make sure no one ever wrote down what they were doing. And they take us to the wild edges of the island, to the cliffs and the coves and the long dark beaches where, on a moonless night, fortunes moved through the dark. In the 17 and early 1800s, before the customs men had the reach and the power they hold today, an enormous secret trade moved along the southern coast of England. Brandy and tea, tobacco, silk, fine lace, goods that carried heavy taxes and so were worth a fortune if you could land them on a quiet beach in the dark and spirit them away inland before anyone official noticed. Whole coastal communities lived in part off this trade. The men and women who ran it were not for the most part the dashing romantic rogues that later stories made of them. Some were genuinely violent. Some belonged to organized gangs of real ruthlessness. But many were simply ordinary people in hard places taking the one chance the sea offered them to make a living, and a trade like that needs hiding places. When a boatload of contraband comes ashore in the dead of night, it has to vanish fast into somewhere safe and out of sight until it can be moved on. The coast obliged them. The soft cliffs of the south are full of caves and hollows, some natural, some not, and the smugglers used them gratefully. In one seaside town on the southern coast, there is a vast warren of chambers and passages cut into the soft rock beneath the town, and the smugglers knew it well. But here is the thing that has puzzled people ever since. Parts of that warren were clearly not made by the smugglers at all. They were already there.
Already old, already worn, already mysterious by the time the smuggling gangs ever found them and put them to use.
The passages had been cut, at least in part, long before, by someone for some reason that the 18th century users of them no longer knew. This is a pattern that turns up all along the coast. In one place after another you find passages that the smugglers used, but that the smugglers found rather than dug. Passages cut in ways that do not follow the most efficient path for quarrying out stone, but that wander and turn and run in directions a quarry would never bother with. Passages finished to a smoothness that no working quarry would ever waste effort on. Little niches cut into the walls at regular spacing, just the right size and place to set a small lamp, in passages that supposedly had no purpose but to remove stone. In the far southwest, on the Atlantic cliffs, there are coastal passages known to local people for generations that appear on no record of any quarry and served no known industry, and that run in exactly the wrong direction for digging out stone, but exactly the right direction for moving goods up from a hidden landing place to somewhere safe and dry, well back from the shore.
Were these made by the smugglers and then denied?
Or were they far older things that the smugglers simply inherited? The trouble is that the smugglers had every reason in the world to leave no records and to lie to anyone who asked, so the documents that might settle it were never written, or were written false. And so these passages sit in the cliffs, real and silent, and the question of who first cut them and why has no confident answer.
And this brings me back to the place I asked you to keep in the back of your mind.
Because it is on this same southern coast, in this same county of smugglers and chalk and cliffs, that the strangest thing of all is hidden. We are getting closer to it now. But there is one more place we must visit first, far to the north and west of here, in a great industrial city by the sea. Because if you want to feel the sheer human strangeness of the urge to dig, there is no better place on the whole island than this one. And unlike almost everything else we have seen tonight, here we actually know the name of the man responsible. We just have no idea why he did it. In the early 1800s, in a fast-growing port city in the northwest of England, there lived a wealthy man who had made his fortune in trade and then, in his middle years, retired. He was, by all accounts, an eccentric and difficult character, gruff and odd, fond of his own company and of doing things his own way. And he began, on the high ground above the city, to dig. He hired men, large numbers of them, and he set them to work tunneling into the soft rock beneath his property.
And he did not stop.
For decades, year after year, he kept gangs of labourers cutting an ever-growing labyrinth of tunnels, arches, chambers, and passages down into the ground. Brick-lined vaults, great soaring arched halls underground, tunnels that branched and crossed and doubled back, stairways leading down into the dark. A whole sprawling underworld dug deliberately at enormous expense by a man who paid for every inch of it out of his own pocket. And here is the mystery that has never been solved. No one knows why. He left no clear explanation. He built nothing down there that was obviously useful. The tunnels do not lead anywhere in particular. They do not connect important places. They are not, as far as anyone can tell, a sewer or a mine or a cellar or a road. They are just there, a vast and intricate and apparently purposeless maze beneath the streets, made by one stubborn man over a great span of his life. So people have spent ever since trying to guess what was in his head. One idea, and it is a kind one, is that it was charity. These were hard years, and there were many men in the city desperate for work, and perhaps this wealthy and unusual man simply could not bear to give money away for nothing, and so invented endless digging as a way to pay honest wages for honest labour, the actual point of the tunnels being the work itself rather than the result. There is a story, often told, that he would have one gang of men dig a tunnel and then have another gang fill it back in. purely so that they would have employment and their pride would stay intact, taking wages they had earned rather than alms they had not. Whether that particular tale is literally true is uncertain, but it captures something people sensed about him. Another idea is stranger and darker. Some say he was a man of deep and unusual religious conviction, who had come to believe that the end of the world was near, that some great catastrophe was coming, and that he was building a refuge beneath the earth, a place where he and the faithful could shelter and survive when the world above was destroyed. A great ark, not of wood on the water, but of brick in the ground. This idea is harder to prove and easy to doubt, but it has clung to his memory all the same, because it would explain the sheer scale of the thing, the obsessive endlessness of it, in a way that mere kindness does not quite. And a third idea is simply that he was a man who liked to dig, who found purpose and pleasure and perhaps peace in the making of these spaces, and who, being wealthy and answerable to no one, did exactly as he pleased for as long as he lived. Some people garden, some people build. This man tunneled on a scale that beggars belief for reasons that may have made perfect sense to him and to no one else. When he died, the digging stopped. Much of his labyrinth was gradually built over, filled in, lost beneath the growing city, used as a convenient place to tip rubble and forgotten. And then much later, people began to dig back down into it, to rediscover and clear and explore the tunnels their strange predecessor had made, and to be astonished all over again at the scale of what one obsessed man had carved out of the dark. And the more of it they uncover, the louder the question grows.
Why all of this?
What was he reaching for down there in the ground, year after year, to the end of his days? We have with him the one thing we have lacked all night. We have a name, we have a date, we have a documented person who lived in recent enough times that we ought to be able to know him, and it has not helped one bit. The man is known, and the why is as dark as ever, which tells you something important. The mystery of the British Underground is not only a mystery of lost names and missing records.
Even when the name survives, even when the record is there, the deepest question,
the question of what was really in the mind of the person who went down into the dark and shaped it, can stay completely out of reach. There is a thought that grows on you the longer you sit with these places, that some of what we find underground was never connected to any institution at all. Not to a church, not to an order, not to a town council or a guild or a king. That some of it was private knowledge held by particular families or particular small communities, passed quietly from one person to the next across generations, never written down, used for purposes the users had no wish to advertise, and that this kind of knowledge by its very nature is almost impossible to recover, because the whole point of it was that it was never recorded. It lived in people, and when those people died or moved away, or simply stopped passing it on, it was gone, utterly. And all that remains is the hole in the ground, still there, still real, with no one left who knows what it was for. That is a humbling thought to carry into the dark, but it is the right one to carry as we approach, at last, the strangest place of all. Picture a town on the southeast coast of England. A faded, cheerful seaside town, the kind of place people have come to for holidays for 200 years, with a harbour and an old town and rows of houses climbing back from the sea, an entirely ordinary place. And beneath one of its ordinary streets, with no grand entrance, no ancient ruin marking the spot, there is something that should not exist. The story of how it was found is, as ever, an accident, and a strange one. In the 1830s, give or take, a man was doing some work on his land, and the ground opened. A hole appeared where no hole should be, and so in the way of those days he lowered a child down into the dark on a rope to see what was below. And the child, dangling in the blackness, looked around and came back up with a report that nobody could quite believe. What was down there was a passage, a narrow, winding tunnel cut into the chalk, curving away into the dark, and every surface of it, the walls, the roof, the curves and the arches, every single inch was covered in shells. Not scattered shells, not a few decorations. A vast, intricate, overwhelming mosaic of shells, millions upon millions of them, pressed into the walls in elaborate patterns that wind along the entire length of the passage and open out, at the end, into a tall rectangular chamber whose walls are covered in the same shimmering, dizzying work. The number most often given is somewhere around 4.5 million shells. Mussels and whelks, cockles and oysters and limpets, gathered, it seems, mostly from the local shore, and set into the walls one by one in their countless million, to form a continuous tapestry of pattern running through the whole underground space. And the patterns are not random. There are shapes that look like suns with rays spreading out.
There are stars.
There are great branching forms that people have called trees of life. There are shapes that look like flowers, like hearts, like figures, like symbols from some system of meaning that we can almost but not quite recognize.
Winding bands and panels and borders, an entire visual language made of shells glittering in the dark. Now, you are waiting for me to tell you who made it, and when, and why.
And I have to tell you the truth, which is that nobody knows. Nobody knows any of it. Not who, not when, not why. This is not a case where the experts argue between 2 or 3 dates. This is a case where the honest range of possible ages spans thousands of years, and no one has been able to narrow it. Think about how strange that is. We are not talking about a flint mine from before history, made by people who left no writing. We are talking about a structure in the middle of an inhabited English town, a town full of literate people who kept records, a town that had newspapers and parish registers and property documents. And there is not a single mention of this place being built anywhere. No record of who dug it, no record of who pressed those 4.5 million shells into the walls. No bill, no boast, no diary, no letter, nothing. A work that must have taken an immense amount of time and labor and care, and the written world is completely silent about its making. So the theories run wild across the whole sweep of time. Some have argued that it is ancient, far older than the town around it. A temple, they say, from before the Romans, built by some forgotten people for some forgotten worship. A sacred place where the shapes on the walls held real religious meaning. The sun and the stars and the tree of life carrying a faith we have entirely lost. They point to the patterns, which do have an old and serious feel, not at all like idle decoration. If this is right, then it is one of the oldest and most important sacred sites in the country, and it sat unknown beneath the streets for thousands of years until a child was lowered into a hole on a rope. Others say no, it is much more recent. A folly, perhaps, made in the 1700s or 1800s, when wealthy and fanciful people did sometimes build elaborate shell-decorated grottos as romantic curiosities, or a meeting place for some private society or secret order who wanted a hidden and atmospheric chamber for their rituals. Or, given the coast it sits on, even something to do with smuggling, although a place this elaborate seems a strange use for people who mainly wanted somewhere to stack barrels. And the maddening thing, the thing that keeps this mystery permanently open, is that we cannot simply test the shells and settle the matter, because for a long time after it was found, the grotto was lit by lamps that burned oil and gas, and the smoke and soot from those lamps drifted through the passages year after year, settling onto the shells, darkening them, soaking into them. And that soot has so contaminated the surfaces that the usual scientific methods of dating organic material have been thrown into confusion. The very act of showing the place to visitors by lamplight may have destroyed our best chance of ever learning how old it truly is. The mystery was, in a sense, sealed shut by the people who came to wonder at it, so it sits there still. You can visit it even now. You can walk down into the cool dark and follow that winding passage with its 4.5 million shells curving around you on every side, and stand in the chamber at the end and look at the suns and the stars and the trees of life glimmering faintly in the low light, and feel the full and total weight of not knowing.
Someone made this.
Someone, or many someones, gathered millions of shells from the shore and carried them down into the dark and pressed them into the walls, one at a time, for who knows how long, to make something of real beauty and real meaning, in a place where almost no one would ever see it, and then said nothing, left no name, no date, no word of explanation, and vanished so completely that we cannot even say whether they did it 200 years ago or 2000. It is, I think, the purest example on the whole island of the thing we have been circling all night. A space that is utterly real, that you can touch with your hands, and that refuses absolutely and perhaps forever to tell you what it is. The questions cluster around it like shadows, and the shells sit there in their millions in the dark, beautiful and silent and entirely unable to speak. We may never know who made it. And there is a strange comfort in that if you let yourself feel it. The comfort of a mystery that is not a problem to be solved, but simply a wonder to be stood inside. Some things the past keeps for itself. Now let us leave the deep past behind and come up close to our own time, to the most recent dark that this island made. Because the last great chapter of the British Underground is not ancient at all. It happened within living memory, and it too is full of doors that have never been reopened. When the Great Wars of the last century came, Britain went underground on a scale it had never attempted before. In the space of a few short years, the country dug, seized, expanded, and converted an astonishing number of underground spaces for an almost endless list of reasons. Command centers from which the war itself was directed, communication hubs, factories moved below ground to hide them from the bombs, hospitals, stores for weapons, for fuel, for documents, for the nation's treasures and works of art, carried down into old quarries and tunnels for safekeeping, shelters where ordinary people slept in their thousands while the sky above them burned. In one northern town, deep tunnels were cut beneath the street so that the townspeople would have somewhere to shelter when the bombers came, and on the worst nights, thousands of people crowded down into them, whole families carrying blankets and flasks of tea, settling in to wait out the dark together underground, while their homes stood exposed above. Those tunnels still run beneath that town. Some of them you can walk today, and there is a particular kind of these wartime places that carries its own special strangeness. Across the country, the government dug or adapted secret underground facilities, places that were never publicly admitted to exist while they were in use.
Some were vast.
There was one hidden in an old stone quarry, built to hold thousands of people and to serve as a seat of government if the worst should ever happen, and the cities above were destroyed. A whole underground town with its own water and power and air, kept ready in secret for a catastrophe that, thank goodness, never came. It stood on quiet standby for decades, known to almost no one, before its existence finally came to light. But the part that lingers with me is this. When those wars ended and the danger passed, a great many of these underground places were simply sealed up and left.
Not cleared, not emptied.
Just closed and abandoned with everything still inside. And when people have gone back into some of these sealed sections years or decades later, what they have found is the past frozen exactly as it was left. The equipment still in place, papers still on the desks, personal belongings, a cup, a coat, a pair of boots left behind by people who walked out expecting to come back and never did.
As though everyone had simply stepped out for a moment, and the moment had lasted 50 years. And here is the thing.
Some of those doors have still never been reopened. Across the country, there are sealed underground places from those years that remain sealed to this day. some because they are no longer safe, some because no one has ever found the money or the reason to go in, and some, it must be said, because the things they hold were once secret, and the rules that made them secret were written for a world that is gone and have simply never been lifted, so they stay closed. Dark rooms full of a frozen past, sitting quietly beneath the country, waiting for a return that may never come. It would be easy to think by now that all of this belongs to a handful of famous places: the carved chamber under the market town, the grotto of shells beneath the seaside streets, the labyrinth of the obsessed digger, the sealed doors of the war.
Special cases, you might think. Rare wonders.
The strange exceptions in an otherwise ordinary land. But that is the most surprising part of the whole story, and the part I most want you to carry away with you into sleep. These places are not the exceptions. They are simply the ones that happen to be found and looked at and remembered. For every one of them, there are many more out there that were found and not studied, or studied briefly and then sealed, or never found at all. The mystery is not concentrated in a few famous spots. It is spread thinly and everywhere across the whole island, beneath towns and fields and roads that have never seen anyone come with the tools and the patience to ask what lies below. And we know this because the discoveries never stop. They happen all the time, quietly, in the ordinary course of things. A builder digging foundations for a new development breaks through a cellar floor and finds a sealed medieval storeroom that connects, it turns out, to a whole network of passages running beneath the town centre. Passages that appear on no map and in no record, some of them clearly old, some older still. The work pauses while people hurry to record what they can, and then very often the passages are sealed up again beneath the new building, and the town goes on above them, and the question of what they were goes back to sleep. In one city built over chalk, engineers, checking whether the ground beneath a car park was safe, discovered that the earth below was riddled with old chalk tunnels that appeared on no survey at all. A hidden honeycomb that no one had known was there, with chambers used long ago for purposes the bare stone could not explain. There was, in that same city, a day some years before, when a stretch of road simply collapsed, opening a great hole, and revealed that people had been driving and walking all that time over a void in the ground that no living person had known existed. And it is not only the old tools of digging that keep finding these things. We have new tools now, machines that can see into the ground without breaking it, radar that can be passed over a field and read the echoes of buried structures far below, surveys from the air that strip away the vegetation and reveal the faint ghosts of buried features in the shape of the land. And every time these tools are pointed at a new patch of ground, they tend to find more than anyone expected. In one quiet field, a survey carried out for a completely unrelated reason found, beneath the grass, a whole network of underground passages spreading across several acres, with no sign of them at all on the surface, and no mention of them in any document. When people went to check by carefully digging down, they confirmed it. The passages were real, cut into the chalk by human hands, and the few clues they could gather suggested they were very old indeed, going back perhaps 2,000 years. The full extent of that network has still not been uncovered. It is simply known now to be there, under the field, where the sheep graze and the seasons turn, and nobody ever guessed. This is the truth that the British underground keeps teaching over and over. The ground beneath this island is far, far richer than the surface suggests, and our knowledge of it is nowhere near complete. We have only been digging and recording in a careful, systematic way for a couple of centuries at most, and only in the best studied places. The new machines that can see underground are wonderful, but they have only been used here and there where there was a specific reason to look. Across the great majority of the country, no one has ever passed a radar over the fields or surveyed the ground beneath the old market squares to ask what is down there. which means the real map of underground Britain, the true and complete one, does not exist. What we have is a scattering of bright points in a vast and unexplored dark. So when you hear that there are 900 caves beneath that one city, remember that this is not the final number. It is just where the counting has paused. When you hear of the great labyrinths and warrens beneath the towns, remember that they may have branches and chambers no one has yet found. And remember that beneath hundreds of towns and villages that have never been surveyed at all, there may be spaces that would, if anyone ever found them and read them properly, change the way we understand whole stretches of the past. Now, there is a fair question to ask, lying here in the dark, and it deserves an honest answer before we wind down for the night. The question is simply this: why does it matter? What practical difference does it make that we cannot say who carved a chamber, or pressed the shells into the walls, or dug the endless tunnels, or what lies behind the sealed wartime doors? The world turns just the same. Does any of it really matter at all? I think it does, and in more than one way. Part of the answer is the plain value of understanding where we come from. The people who lived on this island before us were not so different from us. They wanted to be warm and safe and fed. They loved and feared and believed and made beautiful things and tried to leave a mark. Every trace of them that survives is a piece of the long story of which we are the latest chapter.
And every time we fail to notice or record one of those traces,
because it seemed too obscure or too inconvenient, we lose a piece of that story forever. It cannot be got back. The chamber that is sealed without being studied takes its small portion of the human story down into the dark with it, permanently. But there is a second answer, and it is the one that I find quietly moves me the most. These mysterious underground places matter because they refuse to let us believe a comforting lie. The lie is that the past is finished. We like to imagine that history is done, sorted, filed away, that the further back you go, the more settled and known it becomes, that all the big questions have answers and only the small details remain. And the tunnels will not allow it. They insist, in their silent and stubborn way, that the past is not finished at all. That beneath an island inhabited for 12,000 years, an island mapped and signposted and picked over by generations of careful people, there are still spaces no living person has entered, still carvings no one can explain, still passages that lead somewhere we have not yet found, still, very possibly, whole wonders waiting under quiet fields for the day someone thinks to look. That insistence is a gift. It keeps us honest about how much we do not know. It keeps the world larger than our maps of it. It means the next great discovery might be made not by some grand expedition to the far side of the world, but by an ordinary person digging a hole for a garden wall, or walking a wet field after the rain, or simply noticing that the ground sounds hollow when they tap it in a certain place. The carved chamber lay beneath the marketplace for centuries before anyone broke through. The grotto of shells lay beneath the streets, glittering in the dark, for who knows how long before a child on a rope found it. The passages beneath the field lay there for 2,000 years before the radar caught their echo.
none of them announced themselves.
They simply waited with the patience of things that do not feel waiting as a burden, until the world above happened to look down, and what else is down there? In all the ground that has never been searched is not something we can know in advance. It might confirm what we already believe. It might overturn it. It might be something that fits none of our ideas at all and forces us to think in ways we have not yet imagined. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. It is the whole point of it. The mystery is not a gap in our knowledge that we are slowly closing. It is an open invitation to keep looking, to stay curious, to remember that the world holds more than any list of it can ever capture. So if there is something comforting in that,
And I think there is, then take the comfort.
and let it settle over you as we begin gently to bring this night to its close. The comfort of knowing that even this small, old, thoroughly inhabited island has not yet given up all its secrets, that the ground is deeper than any account of it can reach, that the past goes on quietly, in the chalk and the sandstone and the limestone beneath the fields, in forms we have not yet found and in forms we have found but cannot yet read. We have travelled a long way down tonight.
You and I, let us walk back up through it slowly, gently, in no hurry at all.
The way you might wander home through quiet streets at the end of a long evening, with the lights coming on in the windows and nothing left to do but rest. We began in the deepest past, with the question of why a person ever chooses to fight the cold and the dark and the weight of the earth and dig. And we found our first answer in the high chalk hills, where people 4,500 years ago sank their shafts with picks of deer antler, following the good flint seam outward through the dark like the roots of a tree, and left in the deepest galleries small, careful offerings that we will never fully understand. The practical and the sacred, side by side in the same dark room at the very beginning. We went further back still to the painted caves of the frozen world, where people more than 13,000 years ago made marks on the wall that no one noticed until our own century. And on those same walls, ages later, frightened people carved their protective marks to hold the dark at bay. Two kinds of human beings separated by more than 10,000 years, doing the very same thing at the edge of the dark, and neither of them able now to tell us why. We crawled into the cool stone corridors of the far southwest, the Fogus built with such care by Iron Age hands, for a purpose still argued over, storehouse or refuge or something sacred, or perhaps all three at once. And we stood in the round carved chamber beneath the market town, with the saints and the crosses and the symbols pressing in from every side, a message clearly meant and completely unreadable, made by hands no record remembers. We learned to sit with the feeling of not knowing and to recognize it for what it is. Not a thrill, not a chill, but the quiet weight of standing before evidence we cannot fully read, like a letter in a language we only half understand. And we found that even a place we were sure we knew, the row of caves above the river, could hide its true and ancient age in plain sight for generations, simply because nobody thought to question the story they had been given. We met the Romans, who feared nothing underground, and left their warm, hidden floors still waiting beneath the modern streets for a furnace that will never be lit again. We walked among the scowls, that green and uncanny forest where iron has been torn from the ground for so many thousands of years that no one can say when it began, and where a thread of ancient rite runs unbroken from the first diggers to the people walking there today. We waded through the thick fog of legend that surrounds the medieval tunnels, where the love of a secret passage runs so far ahead of the evidence, and yet where, buried among all the imagined ones, a few of the passages are stubbornly, genuinely real. We slipped along the smuggling coast, where passages older than the smugglers waited in the cliffs for the gangs to find them, cut by someone for some reason that the 18th century never knew. We stood amazed before the labyrinth of the obsessed digger, the one man whose name we actually have, and learned the humbling lesson that even a known name and a clear record cannot tell us what was truly in a person's mind when they went down into the dark and would not stop. And then, at the heart of it, we came to the Grotto of Shells, 4.5 million of them pressed into the walls of a winding passage beneath an ordinary seaside town in suns and stars and trees of life by someone who left not one single word behind. A work that might be 200 years old or 2,000, and that we may never be able to date because the very lamps that let people wonder at it may have stolen our chance to ever know its age, the purest mystery of all.
A wonder to be stood inside rather than a problem to be solved. We came up.
Finally, into the dark we made ourselves within living memory, when the wars sent the whole country underground and left, when the danger passed, a scattering of sealed doors that have never been reopened. Frozen rooms full of a frozen past, a cup left on a desk, a coat on a hook, waiting beneath the country for a return that may never come. And we ended by realizing that none of these are exceptions, that the ground beneath the whole island is far richer than its surface, that the discoveries never stop, and that the real map of underground Britain, the true and complete one, has never been drawn and perhaps never will be. There is more down there than anyone has found. There always has been. There very likely always will be. All of it is still there now, this very moment, while you lie in the dark. The flint galleries and the painted caves, the cool stone fogis and the carved chamber, the warm Roman floors and the green scowls, the smuggler's passages and the endless labyrinth and the sealed wartime doors, and the grotto of shells glittering quietly in the blackness, 4.5 million of them, as silent and as beautiful and as patient as they were, on whatever forgotten day, someone pressed the very last one into the wall and climbed up into the light and told no one. If you are in Britain tonight, then somewhere not far from where you are lying, there is something underground that nobody has ever fully explained. And I hope you find, as I do, that this is not a frightening thought at all, but a deeply comforting one. It means the island has more to offer than its surface has ever shown. It means the story is not over. It means that under the sheep and the oak trees and the old churches and the new housing and the roundabouts and the supermarkets, the past is still there, waiting with no impatience whatsoever, to be found, and, if you are somewhere else tonight, somewhere far from these grey northern shores. Then let this be a reminder of something that is true almost everywhere that people have ever lived. The ground beneath you, wherever you are, has been used and shaped and marked by people who are gone. Walked over, dug into, lived in, prayed in, hidden in by hands and lives that left no record we can read. The underground is everywhere a richer and stranger place than any map of the surface would suggest. The dark beneath our feet is the one frontier that has always been right here, all along, under everything. You can let all of that settle now. There is nothing more to learn tonight, nothing more to hold or to figure out. Let the chalk chambers and the shell-covered walls and the cool stone passages and the sealed dark doors soften and drift to the edges of your mind. Wherever you are, whatever hour it has become, the digging is done for tonight. The passages are quiet. The carved figures on the chamber walls are still there in the dark, exactly the same figures they were in whatever lost century someone first cut them. The 4.5 million shells rest in their patterns, glinting at nothing. The water moves slowly through the limestone in the dark, the way it has for longer than there have been people to wonder at it, and the deep, slow rhythms of the old island go on quietly beneath everything that has ever been built upon it. Before you drift off entirely, if you feel like it, and only if you feel like it, I would still love to know where in the world you have been listening from, and what the hour is there now.
A house in the rain somewhere.
A flat in a sleeping city, a quiet room on the far side of the world, where the dark under England feels impossibly distant and is perhaps all the more peaceful for it. Leave it in the comments if you like. There is something I find genuinely lovely about all of us.
Scattered across the planet in our different time zones and our different beds.
Drifting off together while one calm voice talks about the dark under the ground.
I read them.
And it makes me happy to know you were here. And if these slow journeys through quiet, buried, half-remembered history are the kind of thing that helps you find your way down into sleep, then there are more of them here, of exactly this same patient and unhurried kind, waiting for you whenever you want them. Stay if you would like to. There is no hurry. There never is here, but for now, that is enough. You have done plenty for one night. You have gone down through the layers of an old island and come safely back up again, and there is nothing left to do but rest. Put down whatever remains of the day. Let your breathing slow. Let the dark be soft, and let the underground be underground, and let yourself sink gently, the way the shafts sink down through the quiet chalk, into something deep and still and kind, from the chalk beneath the green English fields, from the cool stone passages of the far southwest, from the sealed doors that no one has opened in living memory, and the grotto of shells that no one has ever explained, and all the patient layers of a buried island still quietly working out what it contains. Good night, sleep well, rest easy. We will go down together again, some other night whenever you are ready.